So good morning, Your Excellencies, esteemed guests, dear participants. On behalf of the European Institute of Romania, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our debate on the European Pillar of Social Rights, Impact and Future Perspectives. This event comes in a timely manner, as we have recently witnessed the adoption of the Declaration on the Future of the European Pillar of Social Rights in La Hulpe, Belgium. The declaration underlines EU's commitment to the European social model through the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. The declaration foresees that the pillar continues to provide the map to navigate today's megatrends and shape related policy responses. And in the context of the twin transition, the pillar fosters the preservation of workers' rights, gender equality, equitable opportunities for skilling, reskilling, and upskilling, fair working conditions, adequate social protection and inclusion, and accessible healthcare. This is a strong commitment, not only for the present implementation of the pillar, but also its future development, which surely stands out in comparison to the Europe 2020 strategy. Back in 2017, when the pillar was introduced, the European Institute of Romania conducted a study within its strategy and policy studies series. Focused on the youth dimension of the pillar, the research was among the few of its kind at that time, promoting on the Romanian agenda the topic of the European Pillar of Social Rights and making key contributions. Some of these focused on youth profiling analysis in Romania, mapping of social rights that apply to the young population in Romania, and policy development directions related to the youth sector. 7 years later, from the start of that research, we are now preparing for another study aiming at investigating the future of work in the context of the demographic changes and the technological advancements. Our concern for this social agenda and preoccupation for the topic can be seen not only through our studies, but also through our communication activities. Therefore, today's debate will address topics such as the social agenda for the period 2024-2029, labor market, gender equal access and fair working conditions, access to social protection for all in a changing labor market, and also labor market policies for a just transition. I would like to express my gratitude to the honorable guests that have accepted our invitation and to wish you all fruitful discussions on today's topic. Let me give the floor to my colleague, Eliza Vaș, coordinator of the Studies Unit, in order to introduce our guests and moderate the discussion. Eliza, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Director General. I wholeheartedly accept to moderate this debate. Approaching the official intervention session, I would like to also express our gratitude to the honorable guests that have accepted our invitation today, and we'll have a couple of official interventions. First of all, Mr. Ewout Roos, Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of Belgium in Romania, His Excellency Cosmin Boiangiu, Ambassador, Executive Director of the European Labour Authority, Mr. Bogdan Moldoveanu, Deputy Director, Internal Market and Sectoral Policies Directorate, Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Romania. Thank you very much for being here with us today and sharing with the audience your insightful perspectives on the future of the European Pillar of Social Rights. The second part of our debate today, we have the pleasure to introduce 4 policy and academic outlooks on the subject of our debate. And to this extent, I would like to express our appreciation to the experts that are here with us today. We have Professor Martin Koene, full professor of Social Security and Labor Relations at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Mrs. Laura Reiner, Senior Policy Analyst at the European Policy Center in Belgium, Mrs. Raluca Dimitriu, Professor at the Bucharest University of Economic Studies in Romania, and Mr. Dragoș Adăscăliță, Research Officer at the Employment Unit at Eurofund. Thank you very much, and we look forward to your contributions. In the third part of the event, we will open the floor for questions and comments, and we will kindly ask you to leave them in chat. And on this note, I would like to invite Mr. Ewout Roos, Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of Belgium in Romania, to take the floor. Please.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Vaș, and also thank you, Mrs. Mocanu, for your introduction. And good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you and the European Institute of Romania for organizing this online conference and on the European Pillar of Social Rights, and to allow me to say a few introductory words on behalf of the current Belgian presidency of the Council of the EU. Belgium assumed the presidency now for the 13th time during, as you know, very challenging times. The EU and member states are now dealing with multiple and overlapping crises, the consequences of the Russian illegal aggression in Ukraine, continuing impact of the pandemic still after so many years, the energy crisis, disinformation, extreme climate events, and most recently renewed conflict in the Middle East. Also, our presidency comes at a specific time, at the end of a 5-year legislative cycle, as also the Romanian presidency did 5 years ago. And this means that the task of the presidency is actually double. On the one hand, we try to close as many of the remaining legislative files as possible. And on the other hand, we aim to prepare the orientations for the next 5 years and help to define the strategic priorities for the Union for the time to come. And it was in this context that the Belgian presidency set out a number of priorities in 6 different areas of work under the overall motto of protect, strengthen, and prepare. Protecting European citizens, strengthening the cooperation within the EU, and preparing our shared future. I will not go into all of the priorities, but one of the 6 priority areas of work for the Belgian presidency was exactly the reinforcement of the social and health agenda. In the current context, the need for a Europe that protects its citizens is clearer than ever. And the Belgian presidency aimed to build on the European Pillar of Social Rights that was indeed proclaimed in Gothenburg 7 years ago, to equip the EU with an ambitious social agenda, fit for the future, and to foster a more inclusive, gender equal, and fair European society. On the legislative front, there were a few legislative files that are related to the European Pillar of Social Rights that the Belgian presidency was able to conclude so far. Notably at the EBSCO Council of 11 March, so a bit more than a month ago, the Employment and Social Affairs Ministers endorsed the agreement that was reached with the European Parliament on the Digital Platform Workers' Rights Directive, or the Platform Workers' Directive. Actually, the plenary vote in the European Parliament on this directive is scheduled exactly today, so that will then close the legislative procedure. This directive will improve the rights and conditions of more than 28.5 million Europeans working in the platform economy. And it's the first ever piece of EU legislation that will regulate the algorithmic management in the workplace and set EU minimum standards to improve working conditions for those millions of workers across the EU. I mean, we consider this initiative an important milestone in the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. Also, at the trilogue meeting on the 8th of February, a provisional agreement was reached on a new directive for a European disability card, as well as for a European parking card for persons with disabilities. And according to this agreement, it will be up to national authorities to issue these cards as before, but in a standardized physical or digital format, which would also then improve the mobility of people with a disability. And cards will have a QR code so that to prevent possible fraud. It's actually a directive that builds on a project that was already carried out by Belgium and Romania and 6 other EU countries since February 2016, and the practice will now be extended EU-wide. We also have a provisional agreement of the extension of this directive on the European Disability Card and Parking Card for third country nationals who live in EU member states and who have been recognized by their member states as a disabled person. I'll leave it here when it comes to the legislative front, but when it comes to setting the stage for the next 5-year cycle, the main presidency event was the event already mentioned by in the introduction, the conference of l'AEUP last week on the 15th and 16th of April, the conference on the European Pillar of Social Rights. At this conference, the Belgian presidency brought together the Ministers of Employment and Social Affairs, the Commission, the European Parliament, but also the EU social partners and civil society representatives to discuss the further implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And the aim was to identify initiatives to be put in place in order to continue the implementation and to guide the work of the next European legislature, so the Commission and Parliament for 2024-2029 in social matters. At the end of the 2 days of discussions, the European Parliament, Commission, Belgium on behalf of 25 EU member states, and the ESC, and then also social partners, the European Trade Union Confederation, SGI Europe, SME United, and the Social Platform, signed the La Hulpe Declaration on the future of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And it is through this declaration that the signatories committed to further implementing the European Pillar and to strengthen a social Europe. The text proposes initiatives for the future EU social agenda during the next legislature and reaffirms the pillar as a reference framework for the implementation of EU social policies. This declaration sets out a number of elements for future implementation of the pillar that are also important to Belgium and the Belgian government. First of all, it reconfirms the importance of the European Pillar of Social Rights as a shared political commitment and a responsibility, and as a compass. I think Mrs. Mokano used the word map for further work at EU and member state level, each on the basis of their competences and powers, and to foster upwards social convergence to achieve the EU social objectives that were adopted in Porto in 2021. It will be important to ensure this twin transition, a green and digital transition that is just, and it takes into account the current demographic and geopolitical challenges, and takes into account the principle of leaving no one behind. The principles of the pillar should also be firmly anchored in the EU's institutional framework, as well as in the European semester, in particular through the social convergence framework. I see them getting towards the end of my time, so a few points of attention that I would like to highlight for the Belgian presidency is, of course, to the importance of reconciling technological change and its economic potential with the protection of workers, to avoid a negative impact of the digital and green transitions on the organization of work and on the labor market. Then there's, of course, the important fight against poverty. We had set the target that by 2030, the number of people at risk of poverty or social inclusion should be reduced by at least 15 million, including at least 5 million children. It was an objective that was supported by all EBSCO ministers at the Porto Summit, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And a priority area for Belgium would be to focus on access to decent and affordable housing for all. There was a commitment made by housing ministers in Liège on the 5th of March that we now need to take forward. Similarly, ensuring access to quality public services, and especially children, the most vulnerable, in education, healthcare, childcare will have to remain a point of attention. A Belgian priority is also the strengthening of a union of equality, that equality, gender equality, inclusion, non-discrimination from an intersectional perspective. In terms of government, the European semester should remain the main framework for the coordination of economic and social policies, because it is important to ensure a balanced approach in which economic policies always go hand in hand with employment and social policies. And for Belgium, it's also paramount to integrate the principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights into all policy areas, so cross-sectoral. And with this in mind, with the 20 principles of the European Pillar should be institutionally anchored and reflected in the exercise of the European semester that I mentioned before, in particular through the social convergence framework. Okay, with this, I hope I have given you a bit of an overview of the presidency's activities and our vision for the future of the European Pillar of Social Rights. I may have spoken a little bit too long, so I'm happy to pass on to the next speaker, and I will follow with interest the conference that I hope will be fruitful and interesting for all of you. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing the work that the Belgian presidency has conducted this month, and for also bringing forward the motto of the presidency: protect, strengthen, and prepare for our shared future. You have mentioned the directives and the regulations that have been discussed during the past months, and one of them being focused on the disability card. And then with the LAULP conference and the declaration that has been signed not only by the European institutions, which I think is an important signal on the political commitment, but also by the social partners. On this note, I would like to mention that this conference is part of the European News in the Spotlight, which has been introduced by our colleagues from the communication unit. And given each presidency of the Council of the European Union, we have the possibility and also the honor to bring forward the work of each presidency for the Union, but also for the member states. Now, moving from what has been done at the European level in terms of the Belgian presidency of the Council of the European Union, I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Cosmin Boiangiu from the European Labour Authority to share his perspective on the European Pillar of Social Rights. Mr. Boiangiu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and also thank you for inviting me to participate in this very timely and interesting debate. Thank you to Ms. Mocanu and your colleagues for organizing this. It's quite impressive that you managed to organize this 1 week after the signing of the LAULP declaration. I was there 1 week ago, and now debating this with the audience in Romania. It's quite exciting indeed. And talking about the pillar, talking about the European Pillar of Social Rights, I personally have a strong involvement with this one since its establishment as a collection of rights, of principles that existed before, but they were collected in this form to focus and to put a focus and an emphasis on this dimension of the European Union, which is very important. And I will just stress, because I also take this moment to salute the dedication and commitment of the Belgian presidency to this agenda, and in particular to ELA, to the European Labour Authority. We've received a lot of support and attention from the presidency and from the council during this period. So thank you once again to the Belgian presidency. And to remember also that I took part in the Romanian presidency five years ago, and a few of the main achievements of the presidency were also advancing the pillar of social rights in key areas. I would just recall that during our presidency, a few important directives were adopted, and regulations, work-life balance, for example, or the Transparent Working Conditions Directive, which was the first, I would say, legislative act to advance new rights for workers in Europe after 20 years or so. And not least the regulation on the European Labour Authority. So we had our contribution as a presidency, and now we pass the torch, and we are happy to see the Belgian presidency taking the lead in these matters in important times, in crucial times. And just recall what previous speakers just mentioned. There are many challenges coming towards us, and we've been to some crises. These were circumstantial, like the pandemic or the recent war of aggression of Russia in Ukraine. But then we are also expecting important challenges for the European market, for the European society. Some of these were mentioned, the greening policies, digitalization, digital transformation, but also demographic pressures and others. So that's why it's timely to have this focus on Europe that protects, on social rights, because this is our model of economy and society in Europe. And it's not a coincidence that one of the key elements of the La Hulpe conference last week was the presentation of the report of Enrico Letta on the single market. And it's crucial because the report is titled More Than Just a Market. And that's key, because our single market, it's one of our biggest assets in the European Union, but it's also a special one because it includes this social dimension. And this is the key, and it might be our strength, it might be also our vulnerability, but it's important that we build on that, and we face the challenges that will come based on this, with a strong element of social protection, of protection of these rights. And that's why I was happy to see a strong determination from all participants to enforce and strengthen these principles. All of them, they are, as I said, crucial for a fair, just transition to a renewed economy and renewed society in the coming years. And we at the European Labour Authority, we are also at the core of these principles. We are in charge with labor mobility. So that part of our citizens, of our employers and companies that move across borders to work, to live, to do business. And it's not necessarily a high number. It's just 3% of the total population of the EU in general, but it's very visible, and it is one of the engine of growth for many economies and societies. So we are doing our share to ensure equal conditions for those who move to another country to work, fair treatment, that we protect people, workers, citizens from abuses, from discrimination, and also we protect businesses from unloyal competition. And we try to make sure that the internal market, especially when it's about services, the provision of services across borders, is done in a fair way. So there are many things to be said. We try to, for example, to invest a lot in digitalization, to invest a lot in artificial intelligence, to make sure that technology works for us and not against us. And that's why we are placing a lot of focus on using digital tools for the benefit of people. Whether we talk about access to market, about job matching, about helping people to find a good job, a decent job in Europe, to stimulate labor mobility, whether we talk about how we provide information to people, and how we inform people about their rights when they move to another country, or about better enforcement, more targeted enforcement of rules. We invest a lot in artificial intelligence, and I'm happy to say that European Labour Authority is a pioneer in many technologies that are now, let's say, available, and we hope to be at the forefront of digitalization. So many things to be done. We have to be prepared. We have no excuse. We are a public service, but we have to have solution and anticipate the challenges that will come with respect to protection of social rights, to protection of people in these challenging times. So I'm happy to take part in this debate, and I hope we will be able to indeed have a discussion or participate in a discussion, and I'm ready to take any questions if there are from participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your availability. I have noted among the common ideas that have been expressed in the two official interventions so far about the need to reconcile the technological change with the social protection. And to have in mind the fair and just transition in the context of adopting not only social policies, but other types of policies as well. And making sure that digitalization works for us, not against us, and investing in digitalization and artificial intelligence. Mr. Boiangiu, you have mentioned the work that Romania has conducted during its presidency of the Council of the European Union back in 2019. And the file that has been advanced on the work-life balance. And on this note, I would like to make the connection with Mr. Bogdan Moldoveanu from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Director at the Internal Market and Sectoral Policies Directorate. Mr. Moldoveanu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bash. Thank you for the invitation, and also I thank the Institute for organizing this debate. It is indeed a pleasure to present a few messages on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Romania to this timely and important debate on the future of the European Pillar of Social Rights, as this is an integral part of our reflection process on how to better prepare the EU for the futures. It has already been stated by the previous speakers. It's been already 7 years since the Göteborg Summit, and the European Pillar of Social Rights has been serving as a compass, providing guidance and in addressing common challenges and fostering upward convergence in the Union. Moreover, in the Porto Declaration in 2021, the European leaders reaffirmed that the implementation of the pillar is a shared political commitment and responsibility to be carried out within our competences in full respect for the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. The Pillar's 20 principles represent our common strategic responses to the multiple challenges we are facing at EU level today, and they have already been mentioned. The transition to climate neutrality, the digital transition, the demographic changes, and they stand as cornerstones for a fair, sustainable recovery in the difficult economic and geopolitical context we are going through. The pillar's importance both for the European citizens and our partners is evident. It is a core instrument in protecting the European social model, and through its focus on both economic and social principles, is an example of a political system that prioritizes the citizens' interests and well-being. Europe is spearheading social justice and solidarity, as our focus on policy making is on providing decent work, social protection, on combating poverty and mitigating social exclusion. Moreover, a strong social Europe is the foundation not only for our citizens' prosperity and well-being of individual and collective rights, but also of a competitive economy that is respectful with the environment. Our economic future depends on our workers' and citizens' capacity to adapt and face the challenges and transformations of tomorrow. In addition, given the unprecedented series of crises and challenges the EU and member states have to face, the implementation of these policies should remain the key priority, while also taking due account of different socioeconomic contexts, the diversity of national systems, and the role and autonomy of the social partners. As demographics shifts unfold, the pillar provides a framework for adapting policies, promoting active and healthy aging, and addressing the diverse needs of a changing workforce and aging population, all while upholding principles of intergenerational fairness and solidarity. Moreover, amidst the digital and green transition, it fosters the preservation of workers' rights, gender equality, equitable opportunities for skilling, reskilling, and upskilling, fair working conditions, adequate social protection, inclusion, and accessible healthcare. Skills shortages represent a major bottleneck for sustainable growth, innovation, and competitiveness, and require specific actions. A skilled workforce is essential to ensure a fair and green and digital transition, as well as to strengthen the sustainable competitiveness of the Union and its resilience to negative external shocks. Thus, our workforce becomes a matter of EU internal resilience in the face of major economic transformations. EU initiatives such as the European Skills Agenda, the recent communication on harnessing talent in Europe's regions, the European Year of Skills already support member states to address specific shortages. It is essential to anticipate skills needs, to enhance the responsiveness of training systems, and to create the premises for the up and reskilling of people of working age. Another aspect we give special attention to is ensuring fair working conditions. And in this regard, we appreciate the work and the activity of the European Labour Authority in the smooth running of the workforce mobility process and the protection of the rights of mobile workers. It is important to respect the rights of mobile workers, ensure equal treatment and protection against abuse, the correct implementation of the rules for coordinating social security systems, especially with regard to the access to social benefits. At the same time, the pillar is a guiding tool for bilateral relations, including neighboring and enlargement partners, defining the high level of social standards that the EU strongly stands by. The EU is committed to shaping the global decent work agenda and promoting a future work centered on the human dimension. High attention is given to bridging the social gap with the candidate countries by supporting them in defining a modern and forward-looking social agenda that will accelerate the social integration of their citizens on the internal market and support them in smoothing their EU accession process. The recent crisis posed by the COVID pandemic, as well as the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, have highlighted more than ever the fundamental role of social services. Social services are essential for the fulfillment of the basic objectives of the EU, be they social cohesion, territorial economy, social inclusion, equality and non-discrimination, or a high-level employment and economic growth. Many initiatives from the action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights have already been implemented. This has given a strong impetus to the implementation of an ambitious social agenda. The comprehensive and far-reaching EU legislative frame, together with the national legislation and associated public policies, show our continuous efforts in this direction. Yet we are still far from reaching the Porto targets, especially the poverty target and social inclusion. Additional measures will have to be taken at all levels. The current legislative period has seen an intense activity in promoting the social agenda. We notably welcome the progress registered on initiatives such as the Directive of the Minimum Wage or Wage Transparency, the establishment of the European Child Guarantee, measures in the field of safety and health at work, the promotion of social dialogue or support for maintaining jobs during the pandemic. They have all strengthened the capacity of the member states to elaborate appropriate social policies. We particularly welcome the attention given to the subject by the current Belgian presidency of the EU Council and the adoption of the Declaration on the Future of the European Pillar of Social Rights. This declaration establishes a cohesive framework for common ground for collaboration and decision-making in preparing the future social agenda of the 2024-2029 period. We believe that the principles of the European Pillar of Social Rights in guiding policies to achieve social convergence and inclusion remain relevant and must be taken into account in the future strategic agenda of the European Union. Implementing the European Pillar of Social Rights and progressing towards the 2030 EU and national targets of employment, skills, and poverty reduction is key for the development of member states' policy action, with due regard for respective competencies and the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. The multiple overlapping crises have highlighted the impetus need of duly integrating the social aspects into the responses we provide. By supporting inclusion, strengthening the institutional capacity of public services, pursuing sustainable competitiveness, and promoting decent working conditions, we can shape a future in which every European citizen can realize their full potential. Enrico Letta's recent report on the future of the single market also touches upon the social dimension of the single market in line with the values of the pillar for a cohesive and people-centered union. This is a consistent example of the role that our social policies have on strategic objectives, such as the future development of the single market. Despite the increasing pressure of the recent crisis, the EU had the capacity to act in unity and create cross-border cooperation and solidarity mechanisms in order to effectively protect its citizens. We must take stock of these achievements as well as the remaining challenges to build a more resilient, competitive, and sustainable economy to protect EU citizens and to guarantee their well-being. The pillar has become the central reference point for social policy projects at EU level. In conclusion, in order to build a future-proof agenda for the coming years, the lessons learned from the recent crisis must be taken into account, together with an integrated approach of the environmental, technological, demographic, and geopolitical shifts. It is clear that through active dialogues and debates, for example, such as this one today, the direct involvement and support from all stakeholders, The pillar will remain at the heart of the national and EU political agendas and will further strengthen the European project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention today. We have also noted the mention that you had on the Porto Declaration about the shared political commitment towards the pillar, but also the reference to the skill shortages and the European Year of Skills, and the fact that the future of work has to be centered on the human dimension. Now that we have had the official interventions focused on the latest developments in terms of the European Pillar of Social Rights, but also on the future of social protection, I would like to invite you to move towards the second part of our event and to listen to our policy and the academic outlooks on the subjects on the subjects related to our debate. And to this extent, I would like to invite Mr. Martin Koenen, a full professor in social security and labor relations at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, to take the floor. Mr. Koenen, please.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's very nice to be here. These are important times. So it's at the signing of the La Hulpe declaration, which I think is marks another step, a really important step in the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. So I've been in recent years, I've been coordinating a research project which basically deals with the implementation of the pillar. And there are a few points, a few lessons from our research that I would like to share with you. But I would like to start with underlining that I think that the European Pillar of Social Rights has been quite a remarkable success. A remarkable success in the sense that if you read the text of the pillar, it talks about social rights, but it doesn't create social rights. It's a declaration. We have heard several terms for this already this morning, a guide, whatever you want, but it doesn't create any new rights by itself. Then again, it has been used in basically since 2017 as the legitimation, as the start of really an enormous revival, I would say, of what we call social Europe. And there's been an enormous number of new social directives, social recommendations, new forms of financing social policy that have come from the European level. Which I think is if we compare that to the many years before the adoption of the pillar, this has been quite a change. And for those who are in favor of European social policies, it is a good change. That being said, there are things that can be improved, and I would like to really make 4 points on this in my intervention. So the first one is the following. The pillar exists of 3 chapters. One relates to fair labor markets, one relates to equal opportunities, and one relates to social inclusion and social protection. Now, if you then look at what has been done in the last years, then we see that if you look at the implementation of the pillar, we see that this focuses really very much on the fair labor markets and the equal opportunities chapters. This is, of course, good that these chapters are elaborated, that they are implemented in terms of directive recommendations and the like. However, what is less positive is that the 3rd chapter has not been implemented very much. And there's a very limited implementation of the social protection and social inclusion chapter. And this means that the very important slogan of leaving no one behind is not yet turned into reality, I would say. The most important observation here is that we have not really seen any change in poverty in the EU. We've seen a change in who is poor, but we have not seen a change in poverty. So what has changed is that there is much less poverty for people who are employed or for households which would have a high employment intensity. So work is really helping people to get out of poverty. At the same time, there are a number of group households that are further away from the labor market, and they are now the ones that suffer most from poverty. They suffer also from the fact that social protection policies have been less and less able to reduce poverty. So the poverty reducing capacity of social protection has in general declined across the EU, and poverty reduction relies much more on employment. Now, if we see that this does not work for an important number of households across the EU, I think we should work on this. This could be an important task for the future, for the coming 5 years, for the new Commission, the new Parliament to focus on. So I think we should first of all have a stronger focus on the accessibility and adequacy of social protection and minimum incomes. Like employment and gender equality are now really firmly included in the European social agenda. We should do the same, I think, for social protection. Secondly, I think we should think a bit more about how we can make general social policies, especially social investment types of policies, social inclusion proof. And we see that social inclusion policies, social investment policies do not always reach the persons that need it most. So a focus on the more vulnerable groups especially the social investment policies, I think would be required. And thirdly, I think we need a strengthening of the role of social funding. And social funding has already been developed quite a bit more in the recent years, and we could go a little bit further on this. So we could go further in helping member states to provide basic needs, for example, through the Fund for European Aid to the Most Deprived. We can work on temporary unemployment services, as has been done through the SURE program. We can further work on the employability and job opportunities for the people with the lowest skills, the ones that have most difficulty to find employment, through the European Social Fund, and to support the most vulnerable groups in the climate transition through the Social Climate Fund. I think there we have a lot of opportunities to further target the most vulnerable groups and to get them out of poverty. Second point I would like to make is that, and I'm very happy to see that this was included also in the La Hulpe declaration, maybe because some of my colleagues of our project have been very much involved with the Belgian presidency, is the question of access to social rights, access to social policy. And we see that there's still far too many people that have rights don't get their rights. So having a right does not necessarily mean that you get a right. Rights for some people remain promises. They are difficult to access. People feel shame about accessing social rights. Elderly persons with language difficulties, persons with limited education have difficulties in knowing about what their rights are and how to access them. And I think there, again, we have a task for the coming years to improve this. And we can improve this on several fronts. It's about the awareness of social rights, so people should know what they are entitled to. And there are, as I say, quite some groups who have difficulties in that. We can also mention, for example, migrant workers, who often in the country where they go to work are not entirely aware of the rights that they have and often do not get them. We could help the more vulnerable in making their claims, how to apply, how can we do this in a simpler, easier way. We can talk about the accessibility of rights through the portability of social entitlement, personal accounts and cards, was already mentioned in one of the previous interventions. And we can help vulnerable groups through mediation or assistance in when they run into trouble in the application process. So I think access is a very, very important point here. And I think the general point there is that if we develop social rights, and if we think that it's important that certain rights become standard in our European Union, then we can not only create the right, but from the outset, we have to consider how do we make sure that right holders also actually get access to what they are entitled to. And I think that is, as I say, it was included in the La Hulpe Declaration. There I think important steps can be made. Thirdly, and the pillar has turned out to be, I think, until now, a very important instrument to guide social policy, to guide the development of new social rights that are important. But if we limit, as was also suggested in one of the previous interventions, if we limit the pillar to the social domain, the effects of it in the end may be limited. So I think and this has been done already to some extent in the previous years. We should turn the European Pillar of Social Rights into an effective governance tool. And the most important element of that would be that it must be mainstreamed into all EU policies. So it should not only guide social policy, but also economic policy and other policies outside the social domain. And steps have been made here already to make the pillar more a bigger part of the European semester, which I think has been a strong point. At the same time, with the approval yesterday of the budgetary rules, we can wonder if this is good for social policy. If the focus again on what could turn into austerity again, if that is good to help social policy, to help social investment. And if we do not manage to see social policy as an investment, as something good for the future, that will also in the future make people happier, but also will prevent future costs in terms of poverty, unemployment, bad health, etc., then I think we are on the wrong path. Part of this, and to some extent this has been done again, is that there can be more social conditionality linked to European funds, to the RRF, and the social and the structural funds. This has been done to some extent, and this could be maybe further developed. Final point that I would like to make. I got 8 minutes, I think, so I guess I'm almost out of time. Is that as I started out to say, it's in a way remarkable that the pillar has had such a strong effect in such a strong impact in the recent years. And this is remarkable because by itself, it does not create any new directives, any new recommendations, any new forms of financing, etc. So the pillar has an effect as long as there are political actors that use the pillar as the basis for new policy. Now, if we look at the recent years, then we can see that the European Commission, especially, of course, Commissioner Schmid, but also President von der Leyen herself, the whole Commission has been quite active on this front. Surprisingly sometimes, but they actually have. Also, we've had a very, very active activist, we could even say, a European Parliament with strong leaders also, one of them our own Agnes Jongerius, for example, that have really used the pillar to get somewhere, to create something. But what does this tell us? This tells us that for the pillar to be effective, it requires political actors that use it. And it doesn't create anything by itself. Now we are approaching European elections. We are approaching the end of the mandate of the present Commission. We've seen in quite a few member states, including my own, a turn to the right in national elections. So there is no guarantee that in the coming years the pillar will be as effective as it was in the previous years. I think the Belgian presidency has done an excellent job in trying to come to some sort of institutionalization of the pillar through the La Hulpe declaration. I think this is an important signal. But even there, we can see that the main employers, the European employers organizations, has not signed this declaration. 2 of the member states have not signed the declaration. There was a lot of negotiation going on, what goes in, what goes out, the declaration. And yeah, many of the political actors will in the near future be others. And we just don't know who they will be and how important social rights, social policy will be for them, to what extent they will use the pillar as a guidance tool, and to what extent they put their efforts into implementing the European Pillar of Social Rights. So I think it's very important that we are vigilant about this, that we follow this process, and that we try to foster a further implementation of the pillar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention and for bringing at the forefront of our debate the poverty reduction capacity of the social protection, and the need to think more about how we can make better social investment policies and to strengthen the role of social funding, and also in terms of raising awareness about the access to social rights. And to this, I would also like to make a mention regarding the high-level expert group that we had at the European Commission on the future of the welfare state, where the 6th recommendation is also related to strengthening the capacity of social protection. Thank you very much. And to this, I would like to invite Mrs. Laura Reiner, Senior Policy Analyst at the European Policy Center in Belgium, for her intervention today. Mrs. Reiner, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's a very big pleasure to be here with you today. So yeah, you asked me to talk a little bit about specifically gender equality and fair working conditions. Like others have said before me, the European Pillar of Social Rights has provided a guiding framework for promoting gender equality and social justice across the EU. By upholding principles such as equal opportunities, work-life balance, non-discrimination, social protection, and inclusive participation, the pillar emphasizes the importance of gender equality as a fundamental right and a key component of social justice. Nevertheless, while underlining its importance as a compass, and I do want to underline that, I would also want to explore just how far we still have to go before we can even begin to claim that it's fully implemented, especially when we're talking about gender equality. So to begin with, I just want to start by talking a bit about care work, particularly the need to address our valuation and the perception of care work. It's typically unrecognized, undervalued, predominantly shouldered by women, and the COVID-19 pandemic did do a good job of highlighting just how essential it is in sustaining our economies and our societies. The disproportionate burden of care responsibilities borne by women exacerbates gender inequalities within the labour market, with women constituting around 76% of care workers in the EU. Professions such as childcare, healthcare, cleaning remain undervalued, underpaid, which then perpetuates the gap in earnings between men and women, and of course then the subsequent gap in pensions. Informal care as well, predominantly again provided by women, sustains our healthcare systems, our long-term care systems, and without these unpaid contributions, I think it's genuinely fair to say our societal infrastructure would collapse. However, this unacknowledged burden acts as a significant barrier from to women's participation in the labour market, with millions of women across the EU sidelined from employment due to caregiving responsibilities. So the imperative to rectify this imbalance goes well beyond gender equality. It's also a prerequisite for navigating the demographic shifts that Europe is already seeing and which will accelerate. So with an aging population, the demand for long-term care is poised to escalate exponentially. And as things stand, this is likely to further exacerbate the burden that's already being placed on women. We also shouldn't overlook the implications associated with outsourcing care responsibilities as well, that while we can formalize care provision to alleviate, for instance, inequalities in households, it actually risks perpetuating wider gender inequalities and disparities within society, because these usually low-paid jobs tend to fall to women. So we need to really make a holistic reassessment of the norms surrounding care, and that needs to encompass pay, conditions, responsibilities, if we're going to dismantle structural barriers perpetuating gender inequality. Put bluntly, the economic case for investing in care is actually very strong. Not only does it offer job opportunities, particularly for women, but it bolsters GDP growth and strengthens social infrastructure. Women's Budget Group in the UK did an analysis which reckoned that investment in care, the equivalent investment in care as you would make, for instance, in infrastructure, like building bridges and so on, actually had a 3.3 times greater return on the investment. So it's not just a moral imperative, though that should frankly be enough, but it's also a strategic imperative for fostering growth and prosperity. But beyond, leaving care to one side for a while, but beyond care, there also needs to be work done both at EU level and member state level still. This last 5 years of the European Commission has seen very ambitious initiatives. The gender equality strategy promised a future where gender-based violence, sexual discrimination, structural inequalities will be eradicated. Yet, despite many laudable initiatives passed, there's still much to be done. However, I do really want to applaud Commission President von der Leyen for the efforts that have been made during these 5 years. Yes, implementation remains a challenge, but it doesn't take away from the fact that a lot of political capital, her political capital and others, has been expended to push legislative initiatives and legislative files through that promote gender equality. The initiatives that have been put through, for instance, from the European Care Strategy to combating violence against women, promoting pay transparency, work-life balance directive, very, very valuable. The Pillars action plan targets to halve the gender employment gap compared to 2019 and to increase the provision of formal early childhood education and care are important signposts. However, I don't want to dwell on it because it depresses me too much, but violence against women continues to be a plague on our society. And of course, the COVID pandemic is recognized as, unfortunately, seeing numbers dramatically increase. Despite efforts, legislative efforts, such as the Directive on combating violence against women, domestic violence, the prevalence of violence still exists. And is also exacerbated by underreporting and lack of political commitment in some member states. Failure of 6 EU countries, Bulgaria, Czechia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovakia, to ratify the Istanbul Convention is horrifying for me, to be honest. So yes, while EU ratification during the mandate of the Istanbul Convention has been a step forward, there needs to be work from all member states to align their actions with the goals that the Union has set. There also remains a significant gender employment gap, with women having a much lower employment rate than men typically. In Romania, for instance, the gap is 55.8% for women compared to 73% for men. So there's a long way to go there. And also, while the principle of equal pay has been enshrined in EU treaties since 1950s, women's average earnings are still 14% below those of men. In 2013, the European Commission identified the lack of transparency in pay as one of the main obstacles to effectively implementing the equal pay principle. In a 2020 evaluation, the Commission found that 13 member states had no pay transparency measures, 2 were considering introducing legislation, and 11 had introduced mandatory measures. But as things stand, women effectively still work for free from the middle of November until the year end. while the Pay Transparency Directive aims to address this gap, it does again depend on member states to actually comply. Moreover, the gender pension gap still stands at a staggering 29.5% across the EU, and addressing that disparity requires a good deal of effort, again, by EU and by member states. Furthermore, the Work-Life Balance Directive, which, I have to commend, but has faced significant delays in implementation. Incredibly, 19 member states failed to transpose the directive into national law within the prescribed time frame, again underlining the issue between the mismatch between intent and then the actual execution. This needs to be expedited across all member states, and I'd like to see stringent monitoring mechanisms to ensure compliance as well. In conclusion, achieving a gender equal Europe still demands several things, well, many things, but I'll just touch on a few of them here. So firstly, gender mainstreaming and impact assessments should be properly integrated into policymaking practice at EU and national levels. Secondly, I want to ask everyone to take part in this, because it needs a paradigm shift in how we perceive and value care work. And we all bear a responsibility to undertake that reassessment, also in our own lives as much as in our work lives and in society more generally. And finally, echoing what was said before, so much of this depends on political commitment. And this commission has had that commitment, but of course we need to see that extended into the next one if we want to see lasting change. And I hope it's been clear in everything that I've said, but so much of the responsibility for progress does lie with member states. But I would like to see the European Commission, the next European Commission, continue to use the semester to push member states to implement the CSRs, the country-specific recommendations on social issues fully. However, for that to happen, there needs to be an agreement pretty much now, actually, as to what happens to the Recovery and Resilience Facility after its end, because that has been a tool to give the Commission leverage to push member states to make progress on these fronts. And of course, when that is finished, then it leaves a bit of a black hole. So I hope we can pick up on some of these points later in the discussion, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention and for speaking about the pillar as a guiding framework for gender equality as a fundamental right. And also for raising the topic of care work and the perception around it, most of it being shared by women and being considered as undervalued work. And also the imperative to rectify this imbalance with the further implications associated to outsourcing care work. And the need to have gender mainstreaming and impact assessment in all policies. Thank you very much for your interventions. And now we will invite Mrs. Raluca Dimitriu, professor at the Bucharest University of Economic Studies in Romania, for her intervention today. Mrs. Dimitriu, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to start by thanking the European Institute of Romania for organizing this debate, which is really interesting and important for all of us. My presentation will be somehow related to a specific point in the present and future of the labor market, which is somehow related to digitalization and the algorithmic management. I also have a short presentation, so I hope you can see it. There are some thoughts on this area. I'm not going too deep, partially because of the lack of time, but partially because of the lack of knowledge. I will only have a juridical approach on this, not a technological one. So the starting point will be somehow related to chapter 1 of the European pillar, the first principle of the European pillar of social rights, and also the third one, according to which, regardless of the type and duration of employment relationship, workers have the right to fair and equal treatment regarding working conditions and access to social protection. So the problem here will be if we can consider that this principle is entirely applicable when it comes to the new ways of recruitment policies, especially by using algorithmic management, which is important because it is important also in our context of discussion, because it clearly shows how the European Pillar of Social Rights is still relevant, and it's going to be relevant even in the new and future environment when it comes to labor market and labor relations. And indeed, initially, when we're talking about algorithmic management, the hope was that this is an objective solution, a fair solution, not having a person, a human being involved in recruitment and then in monitoring workers. How can ever go wrong with this? It's clearly something objective, and it has this image of infallibility, but it was soon observed that this type of algorithmic management, instead of losing all the elements of subjectivity of human behaviors, is actually perpetuating discriminatory practices. And this came as a surprise. I mean, how come? And we're obviously talking about employers who do not want to discriminate. Not only they don't want to discriminate, but they actively trying to eliminate discrimination in the recruitment procedures and process of recruitment. And still, at the end of using this type of algorithmic management, the outcome is discriminatory, which is quite strange. And it is amplified in case of deep learning machines. What we found out is that artificial intelligence may amplify the already existing inequalities rather than mitigating them. So what happened was that, and this is what the empirical studies revealed, that even if the algorithmic management are programmed to ignore candidates' gender or ethnic origin, there is a risk of amplifying or existing or even amplifying the discrimination against certain category of persons, vulnerable persons, persons covered by what we called as a protected criteria. So the first question would be, why? How can this happen? Which could be the reasons of this result? And there is an entire library written on which could be the causes of this. There are some question marks still remain in this area, but a lot of scholars were trying to identify the causes. Some of them being the following. First is that there is an environment in which artificial intelligence is working. And since this environment is already discriminatory, it is possible that the algorithmic management is somehow contaminated by the discrimination already existing in the society. It could be the intervention, the human intervention in creation of this application, or the human intervention in applying these decisions taken by the artificial intelligence. So it could be something related to the society itself. Another possible reason would be that the employer is tailoring the ideal candidate, what he or she wants to hire, on the profile or what is already existing in the company. So since the already existing ideal employee in the company is configured in relation to the ethnic majority or the certain age or a certain gender, then this would be like a model for the artificial intelligence. Let it, the algorithmic management, like the algorithm, to disregard persons belonging to other categories of potential candidates. And there is something more in this. And I'm talking about the thing that in the old days, recruitment offer was in a newspaper, for instance, and everybody could read it. But today, these offers are targeting only the potential candidates. So other people not being considered in this area of potential candidates may not even know that such an offer exists. They may not even know that they have been discriminated against in this selection of potential candidates. There are other reasons, like technical reasons, which is one of them is called feedback loop, which is considered to be that the algorithm is only trying to find the ideal candidate in a certain area of potential candidates. And since this selection has been already discriminatory, it is very possible that in this area, the candidate is indeed found. And in this way, it is reiterated that the decision and the selection was good. So in the following wave of using algorithmic management, because they are learning from themselves, it is possible not to even look in another direction. So there are structural reasons, and there are also reasons that we don't know, reasons that we are not completely aware of. And this is why this entire algorithmic management is very often called a black box, because we know what we put inside, which are the data we are asking for the artificial intelligence to use, and we also know the outcome, what is at the end of this process, but we may not know the entire process. And when we say we, I mean, of course, the candidates, also probably the trade union, if the social partners are somehow involved in this process, sometimes not even the employer, because the employer simply bought this application on the free market, and sometimes not even the creator, the very creator of the application, which is quite disturbing. So what can we do? That being the second possible question in this, there are I think, three directions in which we can go in this area. We can use creatively the already existing legislation, and I'm talking about GDPR, which already has the right to be enforced and the right of data access. Actually, all three of these instruments have an element of information and the right of information as a starting point in this. We do have anti-discrimination directives, and most notably, one of the 4 forms of discrimination can be used here, which is the order to discriminate. And we also have the Directive of Transparent and Predictable Working Conditions, which has a very important element of information and the right of information and transparency in conclusion of employment. And talking about information, I would say that the principle of transparency has to be somehow rewritten, somehow reconsidered in the environment of these developments, because receiving is not the same thing as understanding information. And this is a type of information which is quite difficult to actually understand. If it is obscured by technical jargon or complexity, this can be indeed difficult to acknowledge, to understand. And this is why we should, and the few decisions in practice already taken in judicial practice has shown that the focus should be on the outcome and not necessarily on the process. The second thing we can do is to use the new pieces of legislation which are about to be adopted in the very near future. The AI Act, which considered as a high risk this type of data related to employment, worker management, and access to self-employment, they are considered in the AI Act. And also the Platform Work Directive, it has been already mentioned. It is a very important directive in this direction of algorithmic management, because according to this directive, the platform workers cannot be fired or dismissed based on a decision taken by algorithm as an automated decision of the system. So we need to have a person, a human being, oversighting this on any important decision. However, the Platform Work Directive is obviously only applicable to platform workers. So we may need something which will fit on the same level for protecting normal and standard workers. Because surprisingly, we don't have, for standard workers, we're not so well equipped as we are in terms of platform workers. A third thing we can do is to go a little bit further, talking about algorithmic transparency, as I said, reevaluated in a new concept of the principle of information. We can identify some gaps in GDPR because it hasn't been tailored to the issues specific to the world of work. We can institutionalize external audit of the system, which is not an easy task, because there are some intellectual property rights for those who created these applications. We can apply the principle of humans above the loop, which has been introduced by the directive on platform workers. we also have some domestic legislation, notably in Spain, where they have the possibility of trade unions and social partners to be involved in this area of trying to identify the possible problems with the algorithmic management, and also the role of the social partners in this area may be emphasized for all member states, because it is something they can indeed do, including in the collective labor agreement some rules in this regard. And finally, how can European Pillar of Social Rights help? Well, we do have here some elements, one of them being related to gender equality and equal opportunities, like principles 2 and 3. And also because we said that social partners should be involved in this process, we have principles 7 and 9 on social dialogue and health, safety, and well-adapted work environment. My point is that the European Pillar of Social Rights can be used, a very important instrument in this area, trying to deal with discrimination in this very new and quite strange direction when it comes to recruitment and the social relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insightful presentation on algorithmic management, and for underlining that the artificial intelligence might actually amplify lasting inequalities rather than mitigating them, and for informing us on what we can do, including by referring to new pieces of legislation. Next, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Dragoș Adăscăliță, who is Research Officer at the Employment Unit in Eurofund. Mr. Adăscăliță, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot, Eliza. Let me share my short presentation. I hope that you can see it.
It can be seen. All right.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation, and thanks a lot for the very interesting discussion and the very interesting panel. It's as people before me have said, EPSR is discussing the EPSR is a very important topic, because it reflects kind of, or it contextualizes kind of the main kind of policy interventions at the European level that have been implemented in the past couple of years, and important directives, for example, around AI and platform work are good examples of that. Now, in this context, I've been asked to reflect a bit on the broader trends in terms of the impact of the green transitions on employment and working conditions, and kind of link them with the EPSR. So in the next couple of minutes, I'll show you a couple of, let's say, first trends and of what is happening currently in Europe in our labor markets. Then I'll reflect a bit on what is going to happen, especially in terms of developments in employment in the context of the green transition. And then reflect a bit on the issue of job quality, which is something that we care very much about in Eurofound, and which is one of the kind of themes that the Chapter 2 of the European Pillar of Social Rights touches upon a lot. Now, in terms of where we are, I think the main thing that everyone is aware about is that we currently find ourselves in a very tight labor market. So from the point of view of labor shortages, currently they are at an all-time high. And we can see here that across different sectors and using different measures, what we can detect is a large increase in the vacancy rate on the one hand, but also a kind of change in the business expectations with respect to labor as a factor limiting production. What this indicates on the one hand is that although we've been talking a lot about policy interventions to address labor shortages, we're not there yet. So in a review of initiatives or policies that were used in the past decade or so in different European countries to address labor shortages, Eurofound has found that these policy interventions have been to a certain extent successful, especially at the local level, but on aggregate, we're still seeing a massive increase in the labor shortages. And this makes to a certain extent sense because what the graph indicates is that labor shortages have become a structural problem in the European labor markets. We're not talking about cyclical responses to, for example, crises like the COVID or the global financial crisis, but they are something structural because they are linked with the long trends that impact our economies and societies. So that's greening, just green transition, or demographic aging. On the other hand, why policies are not, let's say, addressing the issue of labor shortages immediately is that labor shortages are notoriously difficult to address because they require policy interventions that address multiple targets at the same time. So on the one hand, increasing wages, for example, which is something that we've seen in many member states, does not necessarily address shortages. This can be a short-term fix, but it doesn't respond to the more kind of structural need to fix imbalances in the labor market. Part of the problem in that drives labor shortages is, of course, deficit of skills, and we've talked about skills in the past years. We've talked about policy interventions at the European levels on how to address skills. And at the moment, the European Commission has put forward also an action plan to address skills and labor shortages. What the graph shows is that in some member states, for example, vacancy rates in specific sectors that are linked with the green and digital transition, and this graph shows you the vacancy rate in the ICT sector. So the vacancy rates have increased massively over the past decade, despite, as I was saying earlier, policy interventions. So for example, in countries like Belgium or the Netherlands, almost 1 in 10 vacancies remain unfulfilled. Now, that's a problem both in the short term because these massive imbalances lead to problems with production, but it also in the long term because this type of imbalances can put a brake in the goals that we associate with the green and digital transitions. So this is where we are at the moment. Now, where we are going, in Eurofound, we've done an exercise looking at the macroeconomic impact of the Fit for 55 package, which is the package that the European Commission has put forward to limit greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And two things stand out from that exercise. First, we find that the macroeconomic impact in terms of GDP of the package is relatively small. So the net effect of the Fit for 55 in Europe is about 0.2%. But also the employment effects or the net employment effects of the Fit for 55 package is also very small. So what you can see there, implementing the package would add about 0.1% in EU employment, which basically amounts to around 200,000 jobs. Now, the story, of course, with this type of exercises is always more complicated than what I've showed you in the previous graph is the net effect. And the net effect is small because of the differential impact of the Fit for 55 policies across different sectors. And you can see here that some sectors are very likely to gain in employment as a result of the Fit for 55 package. So, for example, construction would add around 300,000 jobs between 2022 and 2030, whereas a sector like agriculture would lose about 200,000 jobs. Now, that is important because the kind of sectoral composition of the different EU member states is very different. So, for example, if we talk about employment in the context of the green transition in a country like Romania, we need to take into account this kind of localized effects of the green policies. Romania has notoriously a large agricultural sector, so therefore any kind of policy that targets greening should take into account this kind of potential employment effects. The graph also shows you what kind of types of jobs in terms of pay the Fit for 55 is likely to generate. And what is interesting is that in the two sectors that are most likely to be impacted, for example, in construction specifically, the type of jobs that will be generated are low to low paid jobs, yeah, middle to low paid jobs. And that is important in the context of again, in the context of the European Pillar of Social Rights, if we talk about, for example, minimum wages, the directive of minimum wages, and so on. So I think whenever we talk about principles, is to a certain extent quite useful to talk specifically about, put some meat on the bones and talk about what we expect first to see in terms of labor market developments in the next decade or so, and how we can link those principles or operationalize those principles to address some of the issues that the green transition is likely to generate. Now, this brings me to my last point, which is looking at job quality. Well, first, in terms of the type of impacts that the green transition is likely to have at occupational level in different sectors. And of course, when we talk about green jobs, it's a whole discussion about, what kind of jobs, what are green jobs, what kind of jobs the green transition is likely to generate. The first point to be made is that there is no dichotomy here between green and brown jobs. It's usually wrong to assume that is something that we used to do 20 years ago. There is an entire continuum when we talk about green jobs, and you can see here that, for example, in some sectors, the green transition is likely to generate entirely new occupations requiring entirely new sets of skills. In other sectors, the effect is mainly prevalent through requiring enhanced skills, so investment in retraining, upskilling, stuff that we talk about these days. Whereas in many sectors, the green transition is likely to require to generate increased demand and implicitly potentially generate labor shortages for existing skills, right? So again, I think when we talk about the green transition, it's important to really try to, as much as possible, zoom into the potential effects at the sectoral, first of all, but also occupational level. Now, in terms of job quality, the key messages I want to put forward here is that, again, the green transition has mixed effects on occupations in terms of job quality. As you can see here, for example, on the one hand, for the jobs that are new and the jobs that are emerging as a result of the green transition, the quality of the job tends to be higher. So they are, a large share of those jobs are in the highly resourced to moderately resourced jobs, which in our classification means good quality jobs. On the other hand, for the jobs that will be in increased demand, so jobs that we have at the moment on the labor market, but are likely to be in increased demand because of the green transition, are mostly localized in the categories that fall into the bad job category. So the ones that are strained, that are highly strained or poorly resourced overall. So again, in the context of the European Pillar of Social Rights, it's important to consider how we actually operationalize principles that link or have an impact or potentially have an impact on job quality, and what kind of policy interventions should we consider in order to address not only to stimulate investments in green and digital transition, but also to address the potential negative impacts that stem from this from these mega trends. In terms of key messages, I have three. So the first one, as I said in the beginning, I think addressing skill shortages is of vital importance. It's of vital importance in the short term, so we don't need to think about policies that, future policies. It's a problem that we have now and that our labor markets are increasingly impacted by. If we think about the green policies in the medium term, we see modest but highly localized employment impacts, which require employment policies and investments in education and training that are equally localized. So broad interventions are very unlikely to actually address the issues that we're facing linked with the green transition. And finally, in terms of job quality, I would say that thinking about mainstreaming job quality when we think and where we design policies meant to address issues or challenges raised by the green transition is of utmost importance if we are to move toward not only towards a green transition but also towards a just and fair transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for speaking about labor shortages, which are widespread and we are at all-time high, and a large increase in the vacancy rate, and also for sharing the insight that the aggregate medium-term net employment effects of the greening are rather small. And the fact that employment is expected to decline in agriculture, which might be an issue for states such as Romania and Poland. And now we have arrived at the third part of our event, where we open the floor for questions and comments. And to this extent, I would like to invite our participants to write their questions in the chat box below. And while we will be waiting for the first questions to arrive, I would like to ask Mr. Boiangiu, Moldoveanu, and Rus, if you have any comments on the insightful presentations that have been delivered by our policy and academic specialists.
Yes, well, maybe I would have a comment.
Please do.
I was just glad to see that many of the points that we are thinking of are also in consideration for experts today. First of all, indeed, we need to do a lot more on enforcement of rules. The mood now in Brussels and also with many capitals in the EU is that we will not have so much regulation in the future, but put more emphasis on enforcement of rules, enforcement of these rights, and this is indeed correct. A lot has been done for working conditions, but maybe too little for the other aspects, for social protection and others. Also, the emphasis on artificial intelligence is important because many of the challenges will come also from the advent of this new technology. And while in the past all the technological changes and revolutions in technology affected the blue collar jobs, this time it's the opposite. It affects mostly the white collar jobs, the intellectual jobs. So it will be a different challenge to work out in terms of labor market and the impact on the labor market, and also the emphasis on shortages. Indeed, we are, and this is now another challenge for us. We are in a tight market. We are looking at shortages almost in every country practically. We've just launched the European Labour Authority. We just launched the report on labor market imbalances for last year. And we see indeed markets affected by shortages. Road transport, construction sector, care sector are the sectors with the biggest number of shortage occupations. And this will continue to be a challenge for Europe, and hence also the need to import workforce from outside. So there's a new category of problems with third country workers, third country nationals coming into the EU. But again, they have to have their same conditions as workers in the EU. So that's a new problem that we'll have to take care of, because now this category of workers seem to be most vulnerable to abuses, to discrimination, to various adverse conditions. So indeed, it's a very interesting debate, and I'm happy to take part of it. And if there are questions, also happy to respond.
Thank you very much. And I believe that we have one question. Mr. Ruiz and Moldoveanu, would you like to intervene at this moment? No? All right. Then we will ask Mr. Hercog to address the question. Your microphone is not on.
I haven't used Zoom for a long time. Thanks. Ned Hercog from the Swedish Institute of European Policy Studies. Very interesting. Thanks especially to Dragos for an interesting presentation. I wanted to, a couple of people now in the short time they've been here, talked about tight labour markets, and the graphs show that there are sectors and the whole economy, there are vacancies going up and so on. But then I look at the unemployment figures and also the labour market participation figures, and I think this doesn't look like a very tight labour market in Greece, in Spain, even in Sweden, where we continue to have unemployment figures which are substantially higher than historical averages. So there's some kind of mismatch going on. I wonder if any of the speakers, especially Dragos, would like to say a few words about that. Thanks.
Thank you for the question. If you would like to address it, Mr. Radosklesi, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Edwin is completely right. Of course, there are large imbalances or large differences between member states in terms of how their labor markets fare, and especially in terms when looking at unemployment. Greece and Spain have a structural issue in their labor markets when we talk about unemployment, and that's something that was inherited from the global financial crisis. What our analysis shows, though, is that even in kind of environments of very high unemployment, pockets of shortages do exist, even in countries like Greece and Spain, and that's worrisome. And I think it hints to what you were saying in terms of existing mismatches. However, if one looks at the aggregate level, one thing stands out. We usually analyze the tightness of the labor market by looking at the relationship between unemployment levels on the one hand and vacancy rate on the other hand. And they tend to kind of move together. Recently, while the vacancy rate has declined slightly in response to recent inflationary issues, the unemployment rate has been quite stable, right? Which basically means that unemployment is not necessarily on aggregate responsive to vacancies anymore. Now we can talk about, there might be a qualitative explanation for that, meaning that employers do not necessarily post vacancies that are addressed to the unemployed, but post vacancies that are addressed at poaching existing employees. That could be a potential explanation. But what we see is that to a certain extent, on aggregate, we've reached to a certain extent a threshold or a limit in the ability of member states to activate and or touch or reintegrate the broader people who are in the labor market slack into the labor market. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer provided. Ambassador Boiangiu.
Yes, indeed. This is an interesting question, and I would like to also take it. We see many mismatches also in the European labor market, and the short answer would be also labor mobility. And I'm saying this not only because we at ELA we deal with labor mobility, but also because this is an important source for any economy. And I'm looking at another big economy, the United States, and we see figures for mobility that are much higher. On average, this is, I'm talking before the pandemic, on average, we see about 8-10% figures of mobility in the US economy. In Europe, we have about 15 million people in total moving in diverse forms from one country to another to work. This is still low. It's just 3%, and we can do more. And labor mobility is a resource for matching supply and demand of workforce. For example, in Sweden, we see layoffs in the construction sector. So why not stimulating workers to go to the Netherlands, where we see a big shortage? And of course, they will go back in Sweden if there are again new conditions. So it's important to have more labor mobility in Europe, to make labor markets more flexible, more adaptable, and that's critical, and we are working for that purpose.
Thank you for also the comparison between the United States and the European Union in terms of labor mobility. We have another question that has been addressed in the chat box from my colleague Ioana. In the face of the economic and demographic challenges and also of the aging populations across the European Union, how can the pillar address the need for a comprehensive and accessible healthcare and long-term care and social protection systems? So the subject of healthcare that arises in our debate on the European Pillar of Social Rights. Would like to address the question, please raise your hand. If not, I'm going to ask Ambassador Boiangiu as it has the hand raised to address it. And we also have Mrs. Reiner. So please.
Yes, well, my hands was raised from the previous point. I have nothing to add on this because we don't deal with protection, social protection, just in terms of making sure that the rights of workers, mobile workers, are respected also in terms of social benefits and transfer of social benefits and protection from one country to another. But I guess the question is much deeper than that and refers to the national level. So I'd leave it to other.
Thank you for the mention on the competences of the authority. Mrs. Reiner, please.
Yeah, actually, possibly saved me from answering, because indeed I was going to point out the same issue that that we have to be realistic, that the pillar has its rights and principles, but there are some topics within it, many topics within it, which are so closely guarded by member states in terms of their responsibilities, and certainly healthcare, long-term care, social protection they are such topics. Having said that, there of course are ways in which the EU level can encourage sort of better implementation of these principles, these rights, especially around these areas. And just coming back to a topic I mentioned right at the end of my intervention around the European semester, the Recovery Resilience Facility, the country-specific recommendations. For a long time now, the Commission has been trying to prod member states to change this, that, and invest more, create more childcare places, for instance, and with limited, and if I'm correct, actually also declining responses from member states in terms of action. The Recovery Resilience Facility then provided this both carrot and stick. It's a big pot of money there to access, to encourage member states to implement specifically the social country-specific recommendations. And it seems that it has, I mean, still early days, but it seems that there's been at least an intention to start taking steps to remedy some of these gaps. However, the Recovery Resilience Facility is scheduled to end in 2026, at which point then the European semester, as things stand, reverts back to how it was pre-pandemic, and the Commission then lose that leverage that they currently have. So for me, that really needs addressed, and it needs to be addressed quite soon. I know Professor Kuhn also mentioned this in his intervention around social investment. Well, yes, that's needed if we want to have comprehensive, accessible healthcare, long-term care, social protection systems. But the fiscal rules as they stand now will very much curtail the ability of member states to actually make that investment, which is a challenge. I would also point to the points that have already been made on labour mobility, that, okay, that's also going to help with this, but I won't go into that because it's already been covered by the other speakers. And also what I would love to see, not just at European level, but also in member states and regions for that matter, is a real concerted effort to move towards preventative policy making, a longer term approach to policy making where we're actually really using strategic foresight in how we design our policies. We're properly considering the different trade-offs between them. So we want to, I don't know, increase investment in this. Well, it's going to have then cuts in there, or it's going to have negative environmental side effects, et cetera, but actually having a really good view of the long-term effects of policy decisions. But of course, when it comes to health, if we can actually start preventing some of the health issues that are arising from the ways that we live our lives now, then of course that then helps in terms of healthcare spending and so on and so forth later.
Great, thank you so much. Professor Kuhn, would you like to also address this question?
Yes, yeah, just 2 points. So I think the question is in that sense wrong. I think the Pillar of Social Rights actually addresses these issues quite well in its own terms. So the Pillar of Social Rights calls for accessible healthcare, long-term care, and good social protection systems. As we've said before, it's about the next step. How do we then make this come to life? How do we make it real? And in particular on the question of social protection, there is, of course, a debate now if the EU should or should not move to a binding instrument on minimum standards in social protection. So something comparable to the Minimum Wage Directive, where there is like a standard set for how high minimum wages in member states should be in comparison to their own labor markets. Something similar could be done in terms of social protection as well, in terms of minimum income as well. That could be a European initiative. And second point I would like to make is that labor mobility can be really helpful, especially in healthcare. I think it would be a very promising contribution. However, at the same time, we see that there are so many problems also with labor mobility in terms of exploitation of workers. In my own country, we have one scandal after the other, how migrant workers are treated badly by the companies where they go to work. That I think if we want to emphasize labor mobility, we should also further emphasize the protection of migrant workers. And I know that ELA is very active on this, and I'm very happy that ELA now exists and works on this. But I also think that ELA still has, and our own labor inspection, for example, still have a lot of work to do there. Thank you.
Thank you. So we can see some trends related to the European legislative landscape. And here I would make the connection between the idea that was expressed by Ambassador Boiangiu, not so much regulation in the future, but more attention on the enforcement. And now you have just introduced the idea of the minimum standards in social protection. We have another question. Mihaela, please.
Thank you, Eliza. Mihaela Pădureanu, European Institute of Romania. So in the last couple of days, we've seen again scientific evidence that Europe is the fastest warming continent. So my question is related with climate change and how climate change will affect the already vulnerable groups. So my question is not for one specific guest, but if someone would like to say a few things about how can we expect to respond to how climate change will influence the already vulnerable groups. And now I mean about women or even Roma groups, because it seems that everybody will lose in this scenario. Some studies estimate economic losses of around €500 billion over the past 40 years related with extreme weather conditions. So my question is, can we expect even more inequality and poverty for the groups that are already in this situation in Europe? Thank you.
That's a tough question to jump on, but we will invite you to do so, as an answer would definitely help our conversation on the impact of the changes that are currently characterizing our society, and will do so much more in the future. So who would like to intervene on increasing inequalities in vulnerable groups as a result of the climate change? Maybe
I can. Yeah, I can.
Please.
Though I don't think I'm going to say anything very profound, and I apologize for that. But at least to try and answer your question, that I would fully expect that, unfortunately, there will be extremely negative effects on vulnerable groups by climate change. And I doubt that too many people would argue in that, yeah, the health effects, for instance, taking, I don't know, air pollution. Already we have the most vulnerable groups who tend to be living, I don't know, next to a motorway, and you know, already suffering health effects from our lifestyle now. And I don't expect that that's going to improve. And also in terms of yeah, migration potentially from areas which have been negatively affected by climate responses, in terms of maybe increased prices for food and even water as it becomes more difficult to access. Yeah, and also perhaps, I mean, it's not perhaps such an issue in Europe, but, you know, small scale farmers who are losing their harvests because of the impact of climate change. You know, okay, there's got to be measures in place to support them when their crops fail and their income then is lost. So yeah, I like I said, I don't think it's anything profound, but at least as my contribution.
That's for sure a reality check. Thank you. Oh, Professor Köhne.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I think we can look at two types of effects here. And one is more the global one, which the previous speaker also hinted to. I don't think that Europe is not the part of the world where the climate effects, negative climate effects, will be the strongest in the short and medium term. This will therefore most likely lead to much more inward migration into Europe from other parts of the world, which in itself creates, the question was about inequalities, will create inequalities between new incoming migrants who will face very negative reactions here in Europe probably, and people who already live here. Secondly, there is of course the as the previous speaker also hinted, that the negative effects of climate change are always worse on the more vulnerable groups in many ways. Now, fortunately, you can do something about it. And since we are talking about the EU is at least doing something about this in terms of its climate funds, where it has sort of reserved quite a bit of money to help more vulnerable groups in coping with with climate change. You have the Social Climate Fund, and you have another one that I don't remember now what the name was. I think it's good that Europe does this. At the same time, there has been some recent articles that argue that the amount of funds that are that the EU has sort of reserved for this will be totally ineffective or insufficient to deal with the real impact of climate change. So in that sense, it's a bit of a bleak picture, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer provided. If there aren't any more questions or comments at this point, I would like to ask the speakers if they would like to have an idea shared at the end of this debate. And if not, everything has been well said and expressed, and we are very thankful for your contributions today and for being with us and sharing all these perspectives on the implementation on the European Pillar of Social Rights, but also on the future. And to this end, it has been my pleasure to moderate the discussions, and I would like to invite our Director General, Oana Mihaela Mocanu, for the final remarks. Please.
Thank you, Eliza. Thank you very much for an excellent moderation and contribution. I would like to express my thanks to our guests today for their insightful comments and analysis and even recommendations on the topics of debate. It was indeed a timely debate, and I'm very happy that we could organize it in order to discuss in detail some of the recent initiatives and results related to the social pillar. Speaking of the topic of our event, as a matter of fact, my colleague Florentina has followed the program of the presidency, and we planned this debate with an attentive eye to the high-level conference in 15 and 16 April in Belgium. So let me thank Florentina for her support in defining the concept and building the agenda of the event, and for the correspondence with our guests. I would also like to thank the participants for joining us today, and I invite you to remain close to us and to follow the activity of our institute. Our next event in this series, European News in the Spotlight, will be organized in autumn, when we will have a look on the Hungarian presidency of the Council. So thank you and all the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you
you
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.